2023 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. We want to welcome those of you who are here with us at the old courthouse and also those who are joining us online. Some of you may be here to provide public comment. The Board of Douglas County Commissioners welcomes public comment and in advance thanks you for following these procedures. Each action item on the agenda will offer an opportunity for relevant public comment about that topic. We ask that you wait until the agenda item you're here for comes up for discussion. Comments relating to agenda items are welcomed after the board has had an opportunity to discuss the topic. The Board of Douglas County Commissioners will invite comments on topics not included in the agenda during our general public comment time. That will be directly after the consent agenda. This is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to the general business of the Douglas County Commission. We'll first call on folks who are here in person, and then we will turn to any online commenters who are here with us. If you're on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when the time comes and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask everyone to give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes. All public comments should be directed to the County Commission. Campaigning for public office is not allowed. We also reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The public should also know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not represent the views of Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. Please know that online participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet during tonight's meeting. Materials are published online for your reference as well. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and website. Tonight, we have 3 items on our consent agenda, then we'll do public comment. Our regular agenda has 3 items as well before we move to appointments, commissioner and administrator miscellaneous before we adjourn. Commissioners, would either of you like to pull any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll ask if any member of the public would like to pull an item for the consent agenda for further discussion. Seeing none, commissioners, I'd take a motion on the consent agenda.
Commissioner Reed, I move to approve consent agenda items 1.1 through 1.3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 3-0. We'll move on to general public comment. Is there anyone here this evening who'd like to provide general public comment? We welcome you to the podium. Make sure you sign in, and you have 3 minutes to address the commission.
There we go. Larry Wilson, 953 North 400 Road, Baldwin. I just got one more thing I want to go over. Wind energy. I started out open-minded and open to discussion, and I've attended both NextEra and Anna windmill meetings. I still don't understand why, since the power generator would go to other places and not much benefit for Douglas County residents, except possibly the ones who signed the contract. I've read a contract and think it's bad in so many ways. The top problems, if you sign, you're signing for 90 years total. That's crazy. Everyone in this room and everyone listening will be dead. I hope the people that sign understand that concept. It could even be longer. NextEra or whoever they sell out to can suspend the contract, which I assume will suspend the landowner payment. If it's going to be such a good deal, a much shorter contract than a re-sign should be of little concern. There are also many, many ways for NextEra to get out of the contract, almost none for the owners. Then to top it off, they didn't follow our county rules. I don't care if they didn't have rules in other places. That's disrespectful and a basic bully move to see that what you would do, or if anything that you would do. If companies think Douglas County is such a good place for alternative energy, more companies will come with better contracts and better signs. NextEra will push you to vote before the change of commissioners. Don't let them bully you or us. Let it go or vote no. Time's probably up, so thank you very much.
Other public comment? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, we'll close public comment and move to our first regular agenda item, which is a planning item to consider a conditional use permit for equipment storage at 1805 East 200 Road. Hi, Sandy. It's great to have a planner here in person. This is great.
See how this works. Thank you. Sandy Day Planning, and I'm getting a nodding head that I'm assuming that the presentation is actually being shared. The conditional use permit that was considered by the Planning Commission in June is being forwarded to this body. Okay. I forgot how to do this. Okay, the subject property is located on the west side of E200 Road. It's highlighted in teal on the slide. It is also an exhibit in the packet if anybody is following along with that information. It's a relatively small parcel compared to the rest of the land around it. It includes an existing residence with an accessory building that the applicant has been renovating the building to be part of that equipment storage, as well as a parking pad site that would be located between the residence and the exterior building. And I apologize that this says special use permit. It should say conditional use permit. The property is developed with a dwelling in the accessory structure. A conditional use permit does not rezone property. We want to make clear, and we need to make clear for the Planning Commission and for the public at that meeting, that the request for the equipment storage is separate from the actions by Evergy that are also on this property. The activity for the operation for the equipment storage would be restricted to the area shown on the site plan. So that would be the accessory building and then the parking pad site. We did have a conversation with the applicant at the end of the Planning Commission meeting. It was brought to my attention that there is some other parking going on the property in front of the accessory building, and the applicant explained to me at the time that they're still kind of building out that pad site between the residence and the accessory building. And once that's complete, then the parking in front of the accessory building would no longer be used. So there's a little bit of a timing piece going on with that particular activity, but we wanted to make sure that it was clear for the public and to the applicant that the activity of equipment storage would be limited to, on the site plan, building item B on the drawing, and then this gravelled area would also be used for that equipment storage component. And this would be mostly vehicles, trucks. The more expensive equipment would be stored indoors to the structure. What this site plan drawing highlights is the entire property outlined in teal. The area outlined in red is the equivalent to what is the kind of the Evergy project. And again, it's hard to talk about this property without also identifying that there is activity associated with the Evergy laydown yard, but the conditional use permit is specific to the equipment storage. One of the discussions we had with the applicant during the review process is what is their intention for the property long term. There's quite a bit of gravel that was added to this property, and what the applicant has done is to prepare, and that's what this document is, what would be their vision of a future improvement for this property. And that would be basically moving their equipment storage to the back part of the building, perhaps having a shop building, returning this area back to some green space. And then the remaining gravel would be either left in place for them to do whatever maneuvering they have. In order to do this kind of future improvement, there would be a new conditional use permit. So really what they're doing here is trying to convey what their vision is. They're not asking for approval of this. The conditional use permit that you are being asked to consider does not approve this. This just tries to articulate what is going on, given the changes that have been made to the property. So we want to try and make that distinction, because that was a little bit of a confusion, I think, at the Planning Commission. This project as a conditional use permit does require public notice, and we did follow those notice requirements through the process. And this is just a quick summary of those things: the sign, the newspaper, and the written property owner notifications that go out in the packets. This is just a summary of what is already in the staff report, or the various criteria for a conditional use permit, whether the proposed use complies with the applicable revisions of regulations, compatibility with the zoning and land use and design, operation, and characteristics. This applicant uses their property where they come in the morning, pick up the equipment, leave to their job site, bring the equipment back at the end of the day, park it, and then there is an employee that lives on the property, but the other employees associated with the business would then depart. So it has a comparable activity level to other properties where we see residents coming and going, some home occupation types of activities in as far as compatibility or comparability to other land uses. The use of the property, as we showed on the site plan, with the accessory structure and the parking pad, those changes in and of themselves are not significant, but the other work that was done to the rear of the property certainly is a significant change to the site that we acknowledge. I think there was probably some miscommunication. I know there is other work going on, so I'm gonna not address that any further in this particular discussion. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the request subject to the conditions that were in the staff report. I'd like to bring your attention specifically to condition number 3. The property was originally developed with one driveway serving the residents, and then there was a second driveway that was added for the Evergy work. We had a discussion with the applicant that the property is restricted to just one driveway, so one of the two has to be removed. This was the language that we had in the staff report, as I had an additional conversation with Chad Voigt, Public Works Director, about which driveway would be preferable. He wanted to make clear that it is his recommendation that the change to bring the property back to have one driveway should be an immediate actionable activity for this property if approved, and not wait upon the resolution of the temporary business use application. Otherwise, all the other conditions are consistent with the language that we've seen before, requiring a review of the application, having a new conditional use permit at the end of the expiration period, signage to comply with existing county zoning regulations, and then also the provision of the permit approved by the County Public Works Department if there is any oversized or overweight vehicles. Not expecting that at this time, but we wanted to make the applicant aware of that information if that becomes necessary. Planning Commission action was to forward the recommendation for approval. Their vote was 8-1 for their action. There was some concern from one of the planning commissioners, kind of the order of events that took place with this property. I can't really speak to how that all came about. What we are trying to do with this application is bring the applicant into compliance for the equipment storage activity of the site. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, questions?
So I'll start with my most pressing question. So we have an open application for a TBU that has to do with this land and work that was done on this land up until now. And that has been deferred for them to do some additional, come back with some additional information. It seems odd then to have another request that also is kind of based on bringing people into compliance, which is the other way of saying, bad behavior and trying to, find a way to make that right. This seems to kind of compound those two things, having two open applications at the same time. So I guess I'm just saying that back to commissioners, that I'm a little uncomfortable that the order of operations that we're looking at here. Not all of that goes through planning. The TBU goes through a different department. So I can see how that comes to us that way. I'm not faulting, just saying that it makes an awkward discussion, I think, on our end.
I agree, Commissioner Willie, and so I might put a few fine points on that. So I want to be, I'm looking at the conditions that are on the staff report. And the first one I'd like to talk about is condition number 2, that says the applicant shall be responsible for dust control between the laydown yard and the nearest paved road. My understanding is that there is not a laydown yard currently in use. So what are we referring to?
I did use that in terms of a descriptor of
Okay.
what was going on. So we could, if that would be helpful, we could rewrite that condition per your direction.
Okay. And then the next one, the way you just described it was that we would need to remove one of the existing driveways. And here it says upon resolution of, so we'd need to change that condition as well.
That is true. And that's why I wanted to highlight that particular
Okay.
condition. Yes.
And you started to go down the road of which driveway would be removed. I'm confused because you've sort of outlined one part of the property that has a driveway on it, and then another part of the property, which is a separate TBU. And I didn't think I heard which driveway was going to be removed.
Staff did not specifically identify which of the driveways. We were going to leave that up to the discretion of the Public Works Director of which driveway was best. The applicant did articulate with staff that their preference would be to retain this drive, which was the newer constructed drive. Has a little bit better turning radius, although it may need to be narrowed up. That would be something for Chad to confirm in terms of design of that driveway. So my understanding of the applicant's preference would be to retain this drive and close this one.
I just want to jump in because Commissioner Kelly, you brought up the two exact questions I had. So to go down that road a little bit further, well, and maybe I should have gone back and re-referenced our packet from the item that we deferred for the TBU. But I thought that we were talking about the removal of a driveway in that application. So both that point and the dust control point raises for me, those are the points where I get stuck because whose responsibility is what? Because if I recall right, both of those were, I mean, it's different because a TBU is not a conditional use permit. However, you're talking about potential conditions on that. So then it just begs the question. I really tried to keep them separate, but who put in the second driveway? Who's responsible for taking it out? Is it, which applicant? And are we copying the same language in that sense in both places about the dust control and the driveway removal in particular? And I thought maybe that condition 2, the laydown yard, that maybe that was literally just copy pasted language.
It was, and that was my error
Okay.
in using that. It really was intended to be kind of a descriptor. And
point.
normally, I think the dust control would be the length of the property to the nearest paved road.
Mhm.
And that's probably more particular language to this particular activity. When we talk about who is responsible for what, ultimately, planning would say the responsibility rests with the property owner, whatever agreements that they have with whatever other parties that they have using their property is between them and that agreement.
Sure. And
but
I appreciate that
that's-
articulation. I appreciate that
Yeah.
articulation. I know I mean, part of it, we just have to lean into the sort of awkwardness of this conflated situation, because that's what sort of boils down for me, is that those questions seem difficult to answer. And I would agree that ultimately it goes to the owner. So if the owner is this applicant for this CUP, then that's something for us to have in mind about
Well, and
potential.
they're the owner of the property, all of it. So they have the ultimate responsibility.
Okay.
I continue with the driveway. So through the TBU, we recognize that the new driveway was put in without a permit. Douglas County always requires a permit. It was not put to our engineering specs. There's nothing about it that is in compliance whatsoever, the fact that it was a second driveway or what it is. So there's no way that the second driveway can stand as it is because it wasn't designed to go with our roads. That's my understanding. And we have Chad Boyd here who can correct me if I've misspoken on any of that. And this is where I presume a little bit, the first driveway was for a residence and is likely not appropriate for any of the uses that are being proposed in either of the two applications. So I'm struggling here too, that not only did we have a lot of pre-work that was done on this property before the first application, we're continuing to have pre-work done before the second application, and no steps that I know of. Maybe I should ask instead, have there been any steps whatsoever to rectify the fact that they have two driveways and neither of them is likely in compliance for either of these applications?
I am not aware of that. I don't know if county zoning staff can answer that question or if the applicant is available.
We'll give the applicant a chance to talk on that here in just a second. Yeah. I think I've asked all the questions I want to ask right now of staff. Any other questions for staff?
I do have a question. Sure. Be a little bit more targeted with this one. There is business activity happening there now, but it is not a home business. It is not occupied by the owner who is also the business owner. Is that correct? So the business owner does not live there.
That is my understanding. This was not submitted as a home occupation, so I did not review it as a home occupation. And that would not be something that would come to me anyway.
And so I might have to ask this question for Carl, since he's here from zoning and code staff. Do we have an avenue for, usually when we see equipment storage associated with a business, it's a home business, an owner occupied business that then is asking for the equipment storage in addition to that. Within ag zoning, is there a way forward for a business that is not a home business, for business to be occurring even with a CUP in an ag zoning?
In this specific case, it wouldn't qualify as a home business because it's not the owner that lives there. It's one of the employees. That's my understanding.
And can that happen in the ag 2 zoning, or does that need to be in a light industrial or some other kind of commercial zoning?
That's correct. I believe if it were in general business or one of the industrial districts. Correct.
Okay, so this use is not allowed in this zoning district.
Unless it has a conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you.
So, and I guess I want to clarify that. I think we have other or landscaping type operations that operate in ag zoning with CUPs. So this would not be unique.
Okay, thank you.
We could get that information for you,
Yep.
Carl, if we need to.
Yeah, we've approved them before, like landscapes, especially we've had lots of talks about landscape storage in the unincorporated area, and we've approved them before that weren't home businesses that were just using the site for storage. Sometimes they didn't actually have a residence on them, if I remember correctly, but they were used for storage.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. We may have more questions. At this point, we give the applicant a chance to address the commission. Is the applicant here?
I don't believe the applicant's here,
Okay,
Sandy, and they're not online.
not online, not here. Okay. We'll open this up for public comment at this point. Anybody like to provide public comment on this item? Carl, do you want to provide public
I'm
comment?
just gonna stop sharing the
Okay.
screen.
That was going to be a first. Anyone online? Okay, we'll bring it back up to the commission. I'm not sure I'm not sure, I was planning on asking the applicant this. I'm disappointed that they're not here because to me, I don't know if you remove the driveway closest to the house, one of the questions I was going to ask, are you using the new driveway and then cutting back across the property? Carl, I hate to ask you to bring that picture back up maybe for the public, but we have this driveway to the south. And my thinking, I was trying to understand, is that the new driveway that then goes to the house? Per our regulations, that seems like it would be, I mean, you can put the driveway anywhere on that span. It doesn't have to be close to the house. Is that correct, Chad? There's so many staff, and no applicant. Makes it really challenging.
I just got back from vacation and meant to call them to confirm, but
The trick is to outnumber them, right?
Mhm.
So when we approve entrances, we do look at site distance along the property. And, we really want to make sure that they're not interfering with somebody else's use of adjacent property. So not necessarily anywhere along the frontage, okay? But I think the key here is that because there was some, really heavy traffic already through that entrance, we know that traffic can hold up to loads as far as like firefighting. So that's one box checked. We need to see if it needs a culvert, if it's the right size culvert. If it's not, we would tell them to replace it. So there are ways to make that entrance that's been added, meet our standards and function permanently. And then what we want to do though, is before we move past this current application, is make sure we get it down to one entrance on the property. And that has to do with traffic conflicts, people turning out of both those at the same time with somebody down the road. It can block sight distance. It also goes back to public expense. After it's built, the public maintains it, the culvert, the entrance, all of it. And so we minimize that expense by only allowing one entrance. So I'm guessing they're going to want to use the one that Evergy put in. And it's probably easier to get their stored equipment for their business through that entrance and up to that building B than it is for Evergy to come in the residential entrance down to the laydown yard. So I'm guessing we're talking about keeping the south one. We would go out and verify it. We would also require it meets our standards. I think the conditions already stated that way. And I felt the same way. I thought we were going in circles here when I first heard this. And the distinction for me is this is a permanent use that they're asking. And so we got to get it done now. Whatever we're doing, got to get it done now. So yeah, so the entrance, we'll work with it either way they want to go, but I suspect it's the south.
Thanks, Chad.
And the requirement about immediate removal of one of those driveways occur outside of this conditional use permit,
Well, I
or
mean,
only as a part of conditions here?
well, I would actually say that I think the driveway needs to be removed. One of the driveways needs to be removed, whether we grant the conditional use permit or not, right? Because it violates. For me, when I'm thinking about and keeping my mind just focused on the CUP that we have in front of us, whichever driveway they want to use, as long as it meets the specs that are required for Douglas County, I don't have an issue. I've always, since I mean, we're not talking about the TBU, but that's the issue right now is the two driveways. For me, otherwise this business seems, I don't see anything that would say to me that we can't do this. We've done other similar ones in this case, but and so I think that TBU is a separate thing to talk about, but this at least, to Chad's point, gets the permanent use of the facility taken care of. And allows them to use the property in a way that's compatible with our code.
So I agree about the driveway, and that's why I kind of thought after having that discussion around the TBU that perhaps there'd be some efforts towards remedying that before they came and asked us for something else. So that I find a little surprising in terms of maybe wanting to show some good faith efforts towards one or both of these applications of doing that ahead of time. So I guess in fairness, I should ask if Chad's still here, has anyone reached out about coming into compliance about that driveway?
No, I think the last time we were here and talked about it, there was an understanding that we need to resolve these things. We viewed that entrance as temporary, which gives us several months in terms of being consistent with other landowners. So we have time.
Yeah, thanks.
I would also just add that, I mean, we were having a conversation with Evergy, a different applicant then, and the conversation about the driveways was not being had with the applicant that, well, is not here today, but whose application is before us. And if the conclusion is that ultimately the property owner is who's responsible for rectifying that with the county engineer, then arguably, I mean, it's an issue that's sort of squarely, we learned about it through that, but it's squarely an issue for this CUP and for this applicant as the property owner is how I frame it anyway.
I would add, commissioners, my understanding is the Evergy laydown yard project, we're tentatively planning for it to be back before us on August 30th. So if you're just thinking about the timing of the two projects.
That's correct, at the end of August. And that's to also accommodate them to have a community meeting. They're planning a community meeting for the middle of August, and that'll be at the Stall Church.
One of the other issues that was brought is that we've approved landscape companies before. We've also flagged each one of those and said, we need to have a bigger conversation about why we allow these in the incorporated area when they serve almost solely within the city limits of Lawrence, and what that does to our roads. And especially we've got, I believe, is it 2 miles of gravel road between the subject property and the nearest paved road. Sometimes we get to have conversations about event centers and landscape companies that are locating on a hard surface road. Those are much easier for me. This one isn't. And I really would rather have that larger discussion about what's appropriate there before we would approve another one, especially when we're kind of being asked to bring something into compliance that has multiple marks against it in terms of what's happened to date. Normally, I'm really in favor of getting businesses into compliance, but this one, it's because we have this other application hanging out in front of us. I'm really uncomfortable approving something until we've had the first discussion closed. My preference would be to defer it until we had finished the TBU conversation, only because that's the one that came first. Would have been happy to have had the conditional use permit for local business instead, but I'm uncomfortable finishing this with that one still open. How are other commissioners feeling?
Yeah, I guess I don't have the same level of discomfort. This solves the permanent problem of two driveways, and I recognize that the second driveway was recently put in. But if they had removed the existing driveway and then put in the new driveway, as long as it met county specs, it would have been fine. So to me, this resolves that problem. The TBU is another discussion for me. And I don't want to get the two mixed up with each other. I think, and I guess a good question for staff is, when are we going to have a conversation about landscaping? I mean, we've talked about that a number of times and these keep coming, so I understand that hesitancy, but I struggle. Our lack of getting a conversation and getting some regs talked about doesn't mean that everybody needs to stop business. I mean, we've talked about that for a long time, so I want to be careful of penalizing property owners until we get our act together.
And commissioners, and I can be, I'm often wrong or my memory is faulty. And Carl, I don't know. I thought we brought you some information last year related under the number of conditional use permits and the types. I can have that information refreshed, but I'm looking, I think it's staff is going to look for a little bit of direction from you as to, so here's your data. What do you want to do with it in terms of that direction? I don't have a lot of really great answers here in terms of this, other than just, we're going to stop allowing the use, but I can get with Tanya to sort of, if my memory is correct, that we gave you some information on this a year ago and then we just didn't really, maybe it just didn't really jog the right questions. Because we tried to give you all CUPs and try to talk about that in context. And that was somewhat in relationship to like, they're in the grand scheme of CUPs, some of them are landscape, but not all of them. So maybe it just didn't quite go to the next step. So I can ask that and get that back to you. Our focus right now, though, has been on trying to get the temporary business unit use stuff issues figured out. So Carl and I have met with council. Our plan is to try to bring that back in August for you to have conversations about that first. I think we could probably bring you something later this year. I mean, like maybe in September or October about CUPs and landscape uses, if that would meet your, if that's acceptable with the commission.
I mean, I don't, I'm sure that happened, Sarah. I don't think I guess what I was looking for is sort of a recommendation from staff about how to sort of manage the number of landscape storage. Do we want to look at it by, I mean, one thing we could do is a recommendation from staff could be that they're not allowed on non-paved roads, right? That would be one way to limit this. Another way would be, and I'm not saying these are good ideas, but I'm saying like within a township, maybe there can only be so many. I just don't remember hearing options if we wanted to sort of limit these.
And maybe we didn't present you with options because I wasn't sure I had consensus from the commission that we wanted to limit the number of landscape CUPs that were approved. I thought we were just giving you information on the total number of CUPs and letting commissioners think as to what that meant. So let me follow up on that piece. And I think let's get it back in front of you. But I don't want to presuppose that.
I want to check in with my colleagues.
I'm not
to
sure
make
we
sure
have,
that's where we
yeah,
want to go.
I think you should see the whole context of, is there really a problem? And then what are those ramifications before you tell us to just stop allowing them? Does that make sense to have that interim step? Okay.
It does to me, but I'd like to hear from others.
I think the other half of the equation, which we don't have any control over, is why these uses are not allowed within the city of Lawrence when it serves the city of Lawrence. And that was actually specifically called out in the planning commission meeting from the applicant, that we looked for some period of time for a property within the city of Lawrence that would allow us to do this. We couldn't find one. We came here. So it's that aspect of it specifically for landscape companies that really kind of triggers something that I think we need to look at more holistically, because it's not, they aren't always that you come to work in the morning and you come back in the evening. Sometimes they're storing materials there, multiple trips. It's a lot on our roads that I think we do not have a full understanding of. Landscape companies, event centers are probably the only thing that bring the same level of traffic, but the landscape companies are every day back and forth to the city of Lawrence where the job is actually occurring. That's the part that gives me discomfort. I would love to have that bigger discussion. And if this prompts it and says we have to have it sooner rather than later, I'm very happy with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that I don't think that, well, I think there's been lots of moving parts in our zoning regulations, right? In the past few years of brand new regulations and things that we are sort of learning along the way are becoming pressure points or points of confusion. And this is one that we've identified, but so I do think that having a more holistic conversation about this topic in particular and whether or not it's where and how is it allowable, just because I think that's an appropriate response to the volume of such requests that we're getting, right? Which we couldn't have predicted. But I agree with Commissioner Kelly that I'm uncomfortable putting that on this applicant, right? Like putting a long deferment on this application because of that, when there isn't anything other than this sort of awkward extra layer of the TBU. But I do agree that we have to talk about them. We can't conflate them too much, because while they're impacting one another to some degree, if, approving a CUP for this use doesn't have any impact on the decision about I'm sorry, I said TBU, but I meant CUP here, doesn't have any impact on the TBU. And to your point earlier, Commissioner, really about maybe being uncomfortable with deciding on this one first because the other one came first. From everything that I've seen and heard so far, Evergy's actions in terms of doing a bunch of pre-work before getting permission from us is part of the issue. And I don't, I think if just the order were reversed, I don't know that the conversation would be going the same way. Maybe it would, but I don't want to hold that against the property owners and these applicants for this particular use. I think that's a separate conversation for us to continue with Evergy. But that I think now that I have some clarity about those two conditions that we discussed earlier, I'm comfortable enough. It's not ideal land use to me. But given the other applications that are similar that we have approved, and the fact that we haven't decided as a body with our staff how to handle these in the future, that given the circumstances we're in right now, I'm comfortable moving forward with this, with that change in language to those other conditions, and then let the TBU conversation and continued discussion with Evergy stand on its own and separate from this.
I heard a couple of things between the planning commission meeting and now, and I want to make sure that I've heard them correctly. The business, when they said they show up in the morning, they leave in the afternoon, the business is ongoing at the moment. The business is currently operating out at this location. And we don't have an applicant to ask, so I'm looking at our various staff. How long has that business been operating at that location?
I believe they purchased the property last fall. So I think it's been operating maybe since November, December.
When did they approach you about any kind of an application to come into compliance for that business?
That I do not know offhand.
Sandy. Do you know Sandy?
I believe that they did a pre-submittal with staff in the spring. The explanation that I got, and I was not part of that pre-submittal team, was that they purchased the property. They had been looking for property in the city of Lawrence. It's not that the use is not allowed. I think it's that they couldn't find something within their price point and existing, I don't know. But they purchased the property. They spent a lot of time doing some rehab to the property, to the residents, to bring the residents back and make it habitable. They had then somewhere along the line started their operation. I think they were kind of doing some home occupation things as they live, as the two primaries live in Lawrence. And then as their business grew, they grew to need, this is my understanding of how that all worked. So yes, they have been very forthcoming that yes, they are actively operating in terms of needing a place to store their equipment. They go. And I asked the specific question, you know, are you storing landscape equipment, or I'm sorry, landscape supplies, timbers, mulch, whatever? And the answer was no, they have it delivered directly to the job site. So that has been one of the challenges with this project in that I'm reviewing for storage, yet they're kind of a landscape business. And then we talk about home occupation. So all of these terms have been used by somebody in the scope of what we're doing. And that has been one of the challenges that I have had to do to say, this is the box of thing that I am reviewing. So that has added to it. But yeah, they have been operating is my understanding, and they did meet with staff. I was able to go back and find the meeting minutes from that pre-submittal meeting. I want to say that it was early spring. And I don't know what took them a while. We went round and round about their site plan. So staff had a heavy hand in aiding them in getting their site plan just to be readable. So.
And the other piece that I thought I heard was that the gravel for the exterior storage is still kind of being constructed. So they're actively constructing that now before we've had the
That
conversation.
site, yes. And so that's one of those things. The question that had been asked of me right at the end of the planning commission was staff had made the point of saying the activity is restricted to where they're going to park and the accessory building. They don't get to kind of spread out without either revising the conditional use permit or getting a new conditional use permit. So we wanted to make that very explicit, and we explained that to the public. And then I was told, well, they're parking in front of the building. They're not parking on the pad site that's shown. They're parking in front of the building. I confronted the applicant with that statement and said, what's going on? You need to, you know, this is the limits of what you have. And that's when I was told, well, we're preparing that pad site. They had originally shown it on my site plan, much closer to the property line, said, no, that doesn't comply with code. You have to bring it back. And so we, you know, redid the measurements in the site plan. I don't know how much gravel is out there. If they're preparing that kind of gravel pad. If in the future they end up moving all of their business to the back side of the property, then that pad site would be parking for the residents and the accessory building would be usable for the residents. Now that's a future application. So again, there's kind of moving parts trying to understand what is the bulk of what we're looking at right today, but knowing that changes have been made to this property, what is the possibility for the future? And that's where we wanted to say, okay, well, if you end up growing your business, then here's the conditions that apply to that. This application is explicit to this particular area of your site.
So the equipment storage heavy use is the use that we're talking about for the CUP. Do we normally designate how many vehicles, or is it just the square footage of where that storage is allowed?
As a conditional use permit, the board does have the ability to get to that level of specificity. In this particular case, as a planner, I find it easier to identify, here is your physical area that you can occupy. Whatever stuff, equipment you put in this physical space, that's the space you have to work with. Whether that space is taken up by 5 trucks and a couple of trailers and mowers, is it taken up by a bigger piece of grading equipment and fewer trucks? The number of equipment and vehicles does not matter as much on the planning side as the physical space and the limitations that we're using spatially to restrict how much this can grow.
Another thing I don't see on here, we have hours of operation. I don't think we have that. There's just some things that I think we normally see with the CUP in terms of, I mean, if we're moving towards something we're likely to approve, like what are the conditions we would normally put on it in terms of, is there any screening required? If are we going to say only within that 60 by 90 gravel pad for storage or interior to the structure? It seems like there's some language that we normally would talk about.
I think that is something that we have request from planning is like a set group of conditions that we are applying to every single one, but I don't think we've seen that yet.
So we did try to coordinate with county zoning office to make sure that we were capturing conditions. In terms of the screening, I did not condition it because there is existing vegetation along the north property line and some along that front where that building is. So that existing vegetation provides appropriate screening. And then the area that you have that's kind of the open area is between the residence and the accessory building. So the buildings are kind of screening that piece of it. So that was why staff did not add screening. If the site were completely clear, we would have recommended screening. And I
And I want to
thought
add,
we had something about open or hours of operation, but it might be in the body of the report.
Yeah, I want to note, Commissioner, I have that we were going to work on shared conditions for event centers, not for landscaping. So, and I would say each of these are very different. It is hard on equipment storage and landscaping to regulate them. And since they're not doing landscaping on site, I don't know that we really had hours of operation on this particular, and I've seen that on other like painters and other home-based businesses that we don't necessarily regulate hours of operation.
And I think you've hit on where I'm seeing a difference is that in a home occupation, that person is a part of the neighborhood. They live there, they're responsive to their neighbors. This is, I mean, has a fair number of residences nearby. This is where we're looking at authorizing a business use where that owner does not live on the premises within a neighborhood. It's kind of odd to me that we haven't heard from the neighbors since they did show up at planning commission meeting and they were here. Many of them were here for the TBU conversation, which I recognize, different application. I just think because it's not owner occupied, where we don't have someone that is, living there and able to be responsive to the neighbors on that level, that we might need to have some conditions, even if we don't normally under a home occupation.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at a conditional use permit we considered for a truck storage facility in 2020, and we talked about 15 trucks and 5 trailers stored on site. I mean, I think we just need to have a longer conversation about this because we have included those in conditional use permits and I think we need to be clear with the public and help planning staff when they sit down with applicants and say, there's probably some flexibility in these conditions, but here is the set of conditions we need to talk about. We need to talk about operating hours, if we need to talk about dust control, the number of vehicles, all these things that get up. I do recognize that each one is individual and I want to give some flexibility to staff because we're trying to get folks to come into compliance. But I also think we don't want to be seen as being arbitrary on a commission, depending on which planner they got and which day the application came to us. So yeah, I don't want to get too far in the weeds here because we have an application here in front of us that we need to consider, but I think we need to continue to work with staff to make our wishes known and how we, can make sure what's coming before us, we have the tools to evaluate it.
And commissioners, I would also say that you have the opportunity to defer this item and direct staff to develop additional conditions and bring it back to you based off the conversation today, if that's the direction you'd like us to go.
I would be okay with that, a deferral for potentially new conditions and also because the applicant is not here for us to discuss with. And so quite frankly, that's the little bit of space of discomfort that I'm sitting in is moving fully forward. Especially if we're gonna add new conditions without having the applicant here to be in discussion with about it. So I would be comfortable with a deferral if fellow commissioners are based on that. And, you know, for as soon as possible, just to, I mean, as soon as possible for obviously staff, but, and the applicant, and still treat it separate than the TBU and whatever timeline that is tracking on currently.
I would agree with that. And I think we can maybe give the staff some really specific guidance, like I'm comfortable with within the site plan of there's a site for the storage as opposed with screening possibly, or at least saying maintain the screening that's nearby. If that goes away, then replacing something in terms of probably dust as much as site rather than number of vehicles, because that gets a little detail-y for me. But I agree, having the applicant here to work through that would be much more helpful.
Somebody want to make a motion then?
Commissioner Reed, I move to defer conditional use permit CUP 23-00158 for equipment storage at 1805 East 200 Road.
Second,
So we have a motion and a second. I'm going to vote against this because for one, I think we need to change well, if it's deferral, we don't need to change the conditions. I'm going to vote against this because I think we've talked about this a lot. I'm a bit frustrated and I appreciate staff's. I get that. I do think I've pulled up here just searching for the number of equipment storage and truck rentals that we've had. And it seems like we have this conversation a lot. I don't want to target this one. So I'm going to vote against it. We'll see what happens when it comes back.
and to be clear, you're voting against the deferral, not against. the
Yeah, I'm
application.
voting against the deferral, just because I think we owe it to the applicant to move these things along. And I think sometimes we struggle in our own systems and I don't want to penalize the applicant for that. So.
Just in further discussion, if we had the applicant here, I think we could work through some of those conditions. Not having the applicant here, it's hard to assume what their needs are.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Hi.
Those opposed, no, no. Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry, my agenda is all screwed up now because I did way too much searching. Give me just a second. I think the next thing we're talking about is the courthouse, this space renovation. Thank you. It is, oh, there it was. Got it. For the Douglas County Commission's Chamber Remodel Project update. And Jay Zimmershed is here.
You gotta push the button.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jay Zimmershed, Director of Capital Projects. I'll move quickly through this. We're here tonight. I have with me Joy Coleman and James Biben of Bibbins, sorry, of Trainer HL Architects. They are preservation architects and on the team looking at our remodel of the county commission chambers, primarily being driven by the move to 5 commissioners and how we can best repurpose this room to accommodate that. We're working quickly here to get the PowerPoint up and running. They're going to provide a lot of information very quickly here. Be ready to drink from a fire hose. It's some really interesting stuff about the history of this room in particular, and then provide you with some ideas that are coming out of some of their studies and how best to repurpose it. So once we get this up and running, no, that's the CUP. Should be on the desktop.
No, it's 52 megabytes.
It's in all caps. It says like Douglas County presentation or something like that.
I chatted with her. She said it was. Let me, I'll go grab her.
Commissioner, do we want to take a break or are we just good chilling out? Oh, we're ready to go. Okay.
Okay, thank you for hearing our presentation tonight on this room. It's pretty exciting. We have dug into some history, as Jay was saying, but we're going to move through fast because all of it is contained in the packet, so you don't have to hear it all from our voices. And if you have questions, we can answer those as we go through. So the courthouse was built in 1903 by Haskell, John G. Haskell, who also built the Kansas State House and other notable buildings around town. And this project focuses on this room. And as Jay said, the impetus of the project is the vote to move from 3 commissioners to 5 and restore the room was what we were asked to do by the county. So we started by looking back at some history and being built in 1903, we found that the county had original contract drawings of the building, but they were not thorough or it did not include all the drawings. But we did find a photo from 1913 that was included in a county book, Lawrence Today and Yesterday. And when we looked back at the drawings, even though they did draw out the building, they did not identify or locate any of the furniture or the gallery rail. So the orientation of the room was unclear. And so that's where we started digging, and we looked throughout all of our sources and found some pretty interesting stuff. So if we were to, the next slide shows the 1913 layout. So if we were to input that information into a drawing from the photo into the plan, this is what it would have looked like, we believe, based on that photo. And then the next one shows what it looks like currently now. And as you probably know, a lot of the features of the room are original. So the plaster ceiling, the coffered beams, the dais with the backboard, the jury box, back rail and front rail, the tables, even some of the chairs, the gallery rail, the benches, the pews are original to the room. So alterations through time is where we start to document what has changed. So even though the plaster coffered beams are original with the dental molding, the interior of the coffer is not original. That has been removed. And it was a flat plaster with some circles and other ornaments in these areas of the ceiling. There was a central chandelier in the ceiling, and
And that chandelier looks very much like the Mitchell Vance manufactured chandeliers that were popular at the time. We installed several replicas of Mitchell Vance fixtures in the Kansas State House building. So that's the tie with the architect being the same. We're pretty certain that he would have used the same manufacturer of the light fixtures, and we have one of those catalogs showing those light fixtures. So we're fairly confident that we could, if we chose to, replicate that. Mhm.
So there's the arrow in this image points towards like this orb in the middle. And you can kind of tell they almost look identical between the State House and this building.
Yes. There are other features of the room that are concealed, such as the woodwork up at the upper wall and stained glass window level. That would have been stained, much like the woodwork lower to the floor is stained currently, but it is still there. The plaster, of course, has been damaged by the fire sprinkler leak. We all know that. And then the next slide shows some of the plaster features that were on the lower part of the wall that are now missing. We're not quite sure when or how they were covered up or changed, but the indication on the drawing shows a very hard plaster that was scored to look like blocks. And we've seen this in many other buildings, courthouses in particular of this age. And we've shown a picture there of the Cape Girardeau Courthouse in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, or in Jackson, Missouri, showing that treatment. So that's what we believe was below the chair rail and above the baseboard. So the plan, the only plan we could find drawn in existence of the room in this arrangement is really a bad drawing and doesn't completely reflect all of the features of the room. It doesn't have the little notch below the gallery there, and it doesn't have the jog in the gallery rail, but it is kind of representative of what we have now with the dais on the west wall instead of the south. So that was from 1937, we believe. And then a photo from 1954 shows these tables here, and behind shows the dais, or excuse me, the jury rail back here, and one of the old doors. The next photo from 1955 also shows the tables, and this one shows the dais. Even though the angle looks weird and it looks like the guy is really short or the dais is really tall, we believe that it was taken from the balcony up there. So the angle is just a little different than what you would expect. But that shows, you know, all of these features in the room are still here. It shows a covering on the floor concealing the hardwood at that time. And I think we still have remnants of that in a closet back in an office. And then another 1955 photo just shows the gallery rail and the pews behind the folks there posing for the photo. And it showed radiators. We had radiators in this room, which now, of course, we have the baseboard heater. In 2006, we happened to do a historic report, and we have clipped out some photos from that report, and it shows the dais a little different than it is today. It has carpet in this well area and on the platform under the desks, and it does not show the railing on either side of the flanking positions of the desk. And there's an enlargement. So compare 2006 to today, and you can see those changes that have been made. The next one then goes into the position of the gallery rail. We have evidence on on the floor and on the wall at the window casing of where the gallery rail used to be. And so you can see right there on the floor, actually, that's the photo. Is it that one? Or is it's next to it? Yeah.
The outlets or those outlets.
Mhm.
Somewhere along.
Yeah, so it's over there. So we are confident we know how the room was arranged originally, and we have all that evidence, and we know the changes that have been happening. The gallery rail, you can tell if you go over to that corner by the double door, what the new parts are, because they're just designed a little bit differently than the rest of it. And then there's, of course, a utility chase behind me here, going from the attic down through the balcony that is unfortunately designed. Just information. And the jury bench, if we tear into the details of that, it has also been changed over the years. Yeah, it's the next photo. We have some extra pieces of wood here and there. We have platforms below the chairs, which is very typical for this era of a courthouse, to have a jury box that was narrower front to back or shallower, because the chairs were smaller. Our chairs now are very large, and it might not have had a platform. So we peeled back some carpet and found that this one is made of plywood, which would not have been, circa 1902 or 1903. We talked a little bit about the plaster needing to be repaired and the windows. The next slide, the stained glass looks good, but there are flaws in the paint, and it originally would have been stained. So to restore the room to the original glory, then you would want to strip that paint. And then we get to the doors. So the doors are not original to the room, but they are very similar to what was there. And if you really study these pictures, you can see it in the height of the rail underneath the window. The original had a taller rail there. And at one point they were painted, doors, the trim around the door is original, but the actual swinging door is the thing that is replaced. And we feel like it's a pretty sympathetic design. So it's not something that has to be changed. So we go to the 1913 layout and to let's skip to option 1, which is after the current layout. So what we're recommending is to restore the room to its original layout with the rail in its original position, bisecting the room. To the north would be the audience, and to the south would be the well or the commission area, with the dais and the administrator tables off to one side. We would recommend that to increase the dais size from 3 to 5 commissioners. We do that in a way that the 5 would have sight lines to each other. So maybe this happens at, an angle like it's shown there. We'd also recommend to have a ramp for accessibility to rise up to the platform. And at the jury box, to move that to its original position, and then remove the risers inside the jury box so that the tables could be placed in there, and that's where the administrator could sit. We have another option if the choice is to keep the room in its current arrangement, then the recommendation for the dais and the jury box would be very similar. But we like the option 1 better because it's better from an exiting standpoint. You have it, well, 1, it returns the room to its original layout, which we think is fabulous. And 2, it's a better exiting arrangement for the audience. Right now, everyone comes in and out of the double door. And in case of emergency, we have that exit sign above that door there. If you were to go out that door, you get to the stair. If you were to go to this door, you get to that stair, but everybody tends to use the door that they came in and the one that is behind the rail. So crossing the rail to get out of the room across to that is just not a natural thing to do. So turning this back around would help solve that problem. It would also orient the room originally, so the audience is looking at the stained glass. And yeah, let's just go a little bit further here. Let's skip this one. So as part of the research and the project, we also looked into the audio visual. And of course, because of the recent changes in 22, you have very good equipment. And we believe it can all be reused. And there are a few things that might be added to it to make the business progression just a little easier and free flowing. So that would mean maybe some screens at the dais instead of having your laptops. It's very common to see screens inside the desktop that are always there. So you come in, you know, the commissioner comes in and sits down and then everything is down in the desktop. Don't have to do that, but that's, you know, think of Lawrence City Commission room. And that's what we're talking about. And then the rack is full. So the new equipment would be or the new piece, the new rack would house the existing equipment, but allow space for growth. Acoustic ceilings is the next thing that we recommend. Where we have the tile up there now, the acoustic ceiling now, we believe that if we were to restore that to plaster, the room would be very live and the sound would bounce around too much. And so we'd like to put acoustic plaster up there. And there's a few different options for that, just, you know, manufacturers. And then on the walls, we would also like to put some acoustic panels that will capture that sound as it's bouncing around to make it a little easier to hear without the microphones in the room. Then the microphones are for the people participating through Zoom, and then also in the audience on a, what is it called? A closed,
sound loop.
yeah, sound loop, a hearing loop. So if you have a hearing aid, you walk into the room and it tunes in. Yes, so. And our vision for that would be that the images on the wall panels would be historic images of the courthouse or of Douglas County. They could also be plain. They don't have to have a picture on them. The carpet in the aisles between the galleries plays another part in sound, and we would recommend to add to that a soft cushion on the bench that helps absorb the sound as well as providing cushion.
Lots of
Lighting and-
opinions about the bench. So
Yeah.
I may have to keep talking about that.
Lighting and HVAC, the lighting we talked about with the central chandelier, that would be supplemented with down lights that are recessed into the flat areas of the ceiling. And then the grills from the current supply air that's in the ceiling, in the attic rather, those would be moved around to accommodate the reconstruction of the plaster in the ceiling. There's a little bit of electrical work too. Since there have been so many changes to the room, I think there's some exposed conduit here on the wall that is probably not doing much. We have some new speakers, you know, all of those things. We'd want to integrate those into the wall. So there are a few reports attached, but in conclusion, we're recommending to return the room to its original layout and to expand the dais in a sympathetic and a historically appropriate way. And to restore the features of the room that are significant to that original space.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have questions on this? This is not a action item, but I would assume you'd like a little bit of feedback.
I love the history. That was so much fun and the photos and everything. I guess my main question will be, at what point do we attach a price tag to option 1 and option 2?
That would be our next step. Yes, as you can imagine, leaving the furniture and the dais in its current location would mean that all of the electrical and all of those things would remain in the current location. So moving to a new layout or returning to the old layout would mean that the electrical, the data lines, those things would need to be moved. So that one is going to be a little more expensive than the remaining the same orientation. But if we remain the same orientation, then we're going to have a harder time working in the ramp and some other things that do they influence the cost? That's hard to say at this moment, but yeah.
And the furniture, we're intending to have it refinished and rewired and all that kind of stuff anyways, so everything's gonna be pulled up and worked with anyways, so the moving stuff around is not the main issue.
Just a quick question that the plan has a screen staying over there. Did you consider any other, or I see you had a contractor you're working with on AV, but you know, more and more we're seeing less of these types of screens and more televisions. Did you consider that?
Yeah, they recommended to maintain the screens, but to future-proof it for when screens become more affordable at this scale, because that was what stood out, was how big this like projection is. And he said that more often it would be like a grid of televisions instead of like one big like Times Square like screen. So for now, but to prepare it for a potential screen in the future, they can have brackets and stuff pre-built behind there. So that it would be easier. It would be easy to transition towards a screen.
So there wouldn't be a projector there looking this way, would there? I mean, if you rotate the room, where does the projector go?
During or for option 1, it would change. It would change to this side. Basically, the whole room would rotate counterclockwise, including the projector.
Projector would be on,
Yes,
but the screen
aiming this direction. Yes.
No, we have desires to, we haven't worked it out yet, but integrate it with the jury bench or jury box. So it now is above the rail, the back rail of that jury box. And so when we move that over here, then the projector should be at the same level, we believe. So if it works going this way behind the jury box, it should work when we rotate it.
Oh, I didn't have, okay,
And another thing to
got it.
keep in mind is this part of the wall is framed That wall is brick. So that wall is solid. But over here, we have an opportunity to use the space in the framing.
You skipped past the meeting room under the balcony, but will you go back to that? I mean, you don't need to pull up the slide again necessarily, but just talk me through that. Would that idea translate to either option?
Yes, it would, so the key to that is providing the new rack for the AV equipment, because right now that's pretty much all that's back there. And moving the jury box out will help to open that up, but it will also open it up too much. So I think part of that consideration is, how do we keep that acoustically separate if it is a meeting room from this room? And I'm not sure that cost is in our budget that we have at this time, but it does provide an area for a table.
Yeah, I don't
Back
see
there.
it. I don't think it'd be a meeting room that could be used while this room is in use.
Right.
So it could be a meeting room used with if the staff during the day didn't want to use this whole space, we could use it, or it also could just be staging for the commissioners. Staging, is that a little
Or
bit too-
potentially, I mean, when I looked
don't
at
know.
it and thought about going to 5 commissioners, like when we have executive sessions, that perhaps that would be the room that we met in, just because of size or capacity. Certainly meetings couldn't be going on in the same 2 spaces. So my main question was just like, that's part of the plan, no matter which option we might move forward with. And I guess the other part of that question is whether it would be walled off in a sense that sound would not, that the empty void of the space wouldn't have impact on the sound during our meetings. Not that I'm worried about people meeting in there while we would have meetings.
I was also going to say, in the conversations that we've had about the renovations for the rest of this second floor, that office, my office, where you currently meet for executive sessions, retains as a conference space. So that is not an office in that renovation. I would be concerned that without a lot more sound barrier, it'd be difficult to have executive sessions in there and have people waiting out here while you're waiting for executive session to be done. So I think, functionally, we will probably still retain that spot as an executive session location.
Just something you said staging, and I sort of made a joke about it, but actually I do think it's something as commissioners, we don't have a lot of place for storage of purses and bags and things like that up here. So as we think about that, if we decide to turn it, that may be something to think about. I was sort of struck in the photos about the old, this setup makes the most of the windows that we have. The rotated setup actually covers up some of the windows. Did you put any thought into that? Since the jury box is an original, I'm just interested in why we're trying to keep that piece. Because if we move it over there, it blocks those windows and we lose some of that natural light. Did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the jury box, the front rail and the back rail is original, but not the platform of it. Yeah, and so if this room was rotated, then that backboard behind you would be over here, and it wouldn't conceal the window. Go ahead, you have more information.
So essentially with the dais and the jury box, anything that's dark wood is original. So the whole big kind of swooping backboard and this rail, and then on here, the sort of 3-piece desk here, and then the big backboard. All of that is original because it shows up in the 1913 photo. And so our idea was that if we're restoring it to, or returning it to 1913, that does put the jury box over on that side, but it would be reimagined as essentially a sculptural piece that the county staff would be relocated to. And we're able to do that because the platform that the dais sits on is all modern, like 2x4s and plywood, as is everything that's under the carpet of the jury box. And so we think that gives some freedom to reuse these bits and pieces of historic material when crafting an updated dais and jury box condition.
Okay, this is a regular agenda item, so we will take public comment on this. Thank you very much for your work. Appreciate it. Is there anybody here who'd like to provide public comment on this item? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay. Commissioners, any other feedback?
Very excited about a change in lighting. Just both from a visual aesthetic standpoint and to return to that historical component and just an update to happy to hear that recessed lighting in the ceiling along with a singular, more historically representative, pretty piece of chandelier can be the feature. So I'm excited about that part. And this was a really fun agenda packet to read through, and those don't come along too frequently. So thanks for that.
Ditto, and also the acoustics could use a lot of help. I'm glad that that is part of the conversation already.
Yeah, those things. And I think thinking about technology, you know, we all bring our own laptops or their county laptops to this, and having a better working space, I think we would all appreciate. I would like to continue thinking about how we integrate technology into this space. There's also something, unless you've been the chair or maybe we have this crazy thing that when it's this warm, it rains on the commissioners.
Yes,
And so turning, that vent, I don't know if anybody notices this, but we do up here every time we get a nice splat of water. So just something to think about as we think about a new space. But it was really fun to read the packet. I also am really excited about, as a commissioner, you sort of do this ping pong thing all night where you're looking at the screen and then you're looking here, and to put the lectern, or I'm not, whatever we call it,
Podium.
put a podium out in front of us, I think would be very helpful. We do want to retain the historic structure, but it all has sort of trade-offs in there. And where that screen is and looking at that, I just want us to keep thinking about that. So.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for bringing that up, because I noticed that in the drawings, and that would make the head swivel a lot less severe every week to be able to, look forward and see the audience and the public who's joined us and the presenter, and just do a half head turn to glance at the screen would make a big difference. So I appreciate that detail.
The egress solution is much, I think them coming in that way. I will say, if we decide to turn it, I will miss as a commissioner being able to look out those windows. But there's trade-offs in all of it. Yes.
And the trade-off for that is we could actually recognize people without the glare behind
Yes,
them.
totally. Yes.
So commissioners, are you comfortable with us continuing to explore option one? I guess I think the design team's looking for some direction on that.
I would say I'm comfortable with one, but the sooner we can get a price tag on this, the better. And sort of comparing those two for a price tag is important to me.
Yeah, I'd say comparison is important to me too. I have my leanings, but that, I mean, depending on how big the difference in price is for a rotation versus all the other, I mean, I appreciate the point about how all of this furniture and pieces of it will be sort of lifted up, removed, even if they're put back in their exact same place. So perhaps the cost difference is not too significant, but that's a decision point for me.
I would say that we have accommodated funding, an estimate for this in our CIP. So, but we'll keep you posted as we get those estimates together. I'm also very concerned about timeline and timeframe. It's a priority for us to do this obviously before January 1st of 2025, but also we also have plans to renovate the rest of the second floor, but this is the priority. I want to keep you out of this space for as small amount of time as possible. You've been relocated once and it was difficult. So we are also working on how we would do, where you would have commission meetings while this is under construction. And hopefully probably not back in Judge Pokorny's chambers. So.
All right, anything else on this item, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to our final item this evening, which is an overview of the 2024 Douglas County and CFD #1 operating budget.
Thank you, commissioners. Cammie and I are going to tag team these two items. I think we're going to have, Cammie's going to go first with a conversation on the Consolidated Fire District 1. And I am going to share my screen and I'm going to run that for her. If I can figure out, nope, I'm not good at this. Why does it do that? All right. Now, how do I get it? Boom. All right. You ready to go, Cammie?
All right, good evening, commissioners. We are discussing the Consolidated Fire District #1's 2024 budget. This map shows you the area that they cover. It's kind of that brownish orange color. They do cover a large part of Douglas County. This is to give you an update on their assessed values for their 2024 budget. They did have a sizable increase in their overall value, and you can see that the majority of that increase over 2023 came from state assessed utilities, and that would be some of the Westar infrastructure in their area. This is just to give you an idea of where they sit with fund balance and how they align with our new fund balance policy that we've created. I do want to, some of the numbers, you have to look at a different budget in order to figure out the percentage. So the top box is based on a 2023 budget. And then the bottom box is based on the 2024 budget. And those numbers are there for you to understand them. They do have a little bit higher percentage to their fund at some points, but they were just beginning and they do not currently have an equipment reserve account separate from their fund. They intend to start that in 2023.
Oh,
and that's it.
Yeah.
This is moving on to Douglas County. So if you have any questions or that I could help you with, I'm here for questions, and Chief Baxter is as well.
And the current mill levy for CFD1 is at 5.5 mils.
Correct. It is 5.5.
What is the value of a mill for CFD1, which is entirely different from the value of the mill for Douglas County, since it's a different area?
Sure. Can you pull the assessed value back up?
sorry.
No, you're fine.
Back. Here we go.
So just looking at this, without going to my office and doing the math, it looks like it's about 291,000 per mill, but I really would have to go back and confirm that for you. I'm not comfortable confirming that.
Sorry to put you on the spot
No,
there.
that's okay. I just want to tell you, I'm not gonna guarantee it.
I think my main point is, we do all of the county budget and we have some assumptions that we work from, including the value of the mill and how many mills go into that budget, and just kind of a recognition that CFD1, we serve as the fire board, but it is not does not fall necessarily within the county budget. It has a different area that it takes taxes from and a different mill levy, and that each of those mills is a different value. So in terms of when we as a board vote on what does that mill levy need to be, that we kind of have those other assumptions with us for that discussion too. You mentioned the equipment reserve, and that was budgeted for 2023. There's some funds budgeted for 2023. Is that just currently in fund balance, and then that new a separate fund is being proposed for 2024?
Right, so when you budget for equipment reserve at the county, and CFD number 1 is following the county procedures, we do not make that transfer typically until the year end. So
Got it.
you would see it in January when we come here to have the discussions for the county. And then at that point, we would create them an equipment reserve account, and they are budgeted to do that, and they are on track to start that equipment reserve. And continue it in 24.
So in terms of an equipment reserve, and it's a very important piece for, especially for a fire department to have, starting from zero or nearly zero, when it was created in 2020, is that right? How do we know when we've gotten there? Like how are we started to set goals for what that equipment reserve needs to be, or some kind of a CIP process specifically for CFD1? I recognize that this is kind of early in the process for a young organization, but I'm just curious to know what the conversations are and how they're unfolding.
I'd say while Chief's coming up,
I was gonna have.
yeah, we've had a number of conversations about it, and you'll notice if you look at the line item budget for CFD1, they have a large line item that they've been working towards related to lease equipment. So I would say that we're in the process of developing what is total fleet inventory is, and those cost out measures. But I'll be honest, Commissioner, I don't have that for other county departments either necessarily 100%. And it's oftentimes a work in progress and evolves and changes over time. So we're just really grateful that we're going to be in a position that we can create an equipment reserve for the first time and not have it solely be reliant in fund balance. But I think that's something that really will evolve over the next 2 or 3 years. Chief, what are your thoughts?
Yes, Commission. Mike Baxter, Consolidated Fire District number 1, Fire Chief. To answer your question, Commissioner, when we started Consolidated Fire District 1, it was a zero fund balance. As we stated from the very beginning, it was a 3 to 5 year data process to even understand what we needed, where money was going to go, changes or anything within the district. So we started identifying those right away. This is our 3rd year of operation. I have had conversations with Sarah about equipment reserve, replacement of apparatus. What does that look like at our level for a fire district? How can we be in compliance with basically the way Douglas County operates within, a capital improvement plan, equipment reserve, and so forth. So those conversations are currently ongoing. We're identifying those needs currently with that equipment reserve. I can give you some quick history, or not even history, but just information with that equipment reserve. I have 37 vehicles in my fleet. Of those 37 vehicles, 11 of them are greater than 20 years of age, and 8 of them are 15 to 20 years of age. Break it down a little bit further, but just for those numbers right there, I've got over half of my fleet is aged out. So that's what we're looking at with that equipment reserve. First and foremost is that efficient, effective operational capabilities, because the fleet is our mainstay. We can do a lot with without a lot of other things, but the fleet is what we need. So that's my priority currently.
And do you have a schedule for replacing, for this year, next year, replacing vehicles? I assume that there are some that kind of rise to the top of, we need to start getting them ordered because it's a long lead time.
Yes, Commissioner, it is a long lead time, and that is one of the process I'm trying to work through with Sarah currently. One of our problems is that we came in with zero fund balance. And so the dilemma that I'm running into is how do I pay for the debt? Do I do lease purchases, which then causes finance rates, which is not very an economical way of spending taxpayers' money? Do I continue putting Band-Aids on this fleet until I can save up enough money? But it's that process I'm trying to work through and identify with Sarah and different staff, different ways to replace those apparatus sooner rather than later.
And in Chief's defense, I'm not a big fan of leased equipment. I think it's not cost effective. And so I've been pushing him to keep Band-Aids on them and save up enough cash. So like similar to other county practices where we buy equipment outright. He's getting to the point where he may not be able to make it. So I do think it's one of the, things that my hopeful is if his projections for 2023 continue to look good in terms of expense, that we can have some understanding of that and see if we can get some items ordered. But unless we look at a lease purchase, it's and I'm not, he's gonna have to convince me. I'm not a big fan.
See the trade-offs in this particular instance
Yes.
of, for the scope of the need.
Yeah.
So just like we plan for ambulances and order those, in advance for when we need them and have a replacement schedule, I'd be really curious to get some feedback as those conversations are happening for what those needs are likely to be and what the options are for paying for them.
And I'd say, commissioners, I do think it's one of those things that I think Chief and I'd like to spend some time doing that, and maybe with Cammie's help. I'm concerned that he won't be able to do that under a flat mill levy of 5.5. I think at some point in time, if we're looking to really replace this aging fleet, we're going to need to talk about a potential mill levy increase at some time in the future, so that we can try to get up to speed with equipment. And you all have heard from Chad's team in terms of the fleet operations. They have been really great to CFD1 and their work, but I think we are challenging some of their mechanical skills to keep some things operational, and it's been a pretty big expense.
If I can also add, Sarah, Fleet's been doing a fantastic job. One of the other problems that we've had, commissioners, is parts, equipment. So far this year, I've had 3 vehicles. I've currently got one that is down. It's been down for 8 weeks, and it's indefinitely down because part is indefinitely back ordered. I've got another one that spent 3 months out of service because the part had to be shipped from overseas, and it ended up being a used part that they shipped in the first time. So this is just something, it's not just us as CFD1 Fleet with their own fleet problems. Everybody's seeing it, but as we try to put these Band-Aids on these vehicles, we're running into a smaller Band-Aid every single time and fewer Band-Aids. And so that's why Sarah and I keep having these conversations back and forth, but there's going to have to be a time that we're going to have to bite a bullet on something. And unfortunately, it's going to be replacing some fleet.
Other questions, commissioners? Okay, this is a regular agenda item, so we'll open it up. Oh, you're not done with your
I'm not done,
presentation.
yeah. If that's
My
okay.
bad.
Thanks, commissioners. I did want to, we have some kind of follow-up items on the budget overall that we want to kind of walk you through. Let's see here. Let me get to the right slide. I'm going to share some slides with you. So as a part of our normal process that we do at this time of year, as we're preparing for the public hearing, we are preparing our state budget forms. We're preparing the items for publication. And we go back through and we validate all of our numbers and our assumptions and our calculations that we use when we meet with you in terms of the budget process. And I'd say that, oftentimes there are modifications and some changes to these numbers as we go through the process of setting the levy and so forth. in our work to get us to today, we found a small discrepancy in the mill levy total budget calculations on the BOCC spreadsheet that you all were using as a part of those calculations. What I would, so in order to finalize the mill levy calculations and make sure that we're on track for your public hearing, we understand the commissioners want to keep, reduce the mill levy to 2 mills. And I don't really have a strong desire to open back up the whole budget process. So normally what we would do at this point in time when these kinds of discrepancies come up is that we would just take them out of fund balance. That's, the easiest way for us to make sure everything balances at this point. This adjustment is a little bit larger. And I do think since we haven't finalized the CIP portion, we have a part of this conversation that we can have with you tonight. So we need to adjust around $512,000 to get to that reduced mill levy of 2 mil reduction. If we took that, what I wanted to show you here is what our fund balance was when I had a proposed budget to you of 17.9% was your fund balance percentage when I proposed the budget. Where you all left it was at 16.5. So still a pretty healthy fund balance from that perspective. And then you see here what it was based off of. In order to get this adjustment in, if we took it 100% from fund balance, it would reduce us down to 15.9% on the fund balance. If we took half of it, it would leave us at 16.2. So one of the options that we've been talking about as we prepared for this conversation to get us there would be to reduce the CIP transfer amount a little bit in order to not make that full impact hit fund balance. There's a couple of reasons why I would prefer it not to totally hit fund balance, largely which, our intent would be that in 2025, we would have to start 2025 budget making up for that use of fund balance. We would not use fund balance ongoing to cover this issue. So because our CIP transfer has not been finalized, and you guys just heard your CIP presentation earlier today, I think it's a reasonable conversation in terms of if we would want to make that adjustment. What you saw in the work session earlier today and what was in the proposed budget is roughly when you include in the 7% increase and then a additional amount for this consolidation of the special building fund, it got to us to close to an 11% increase. There's also included in that is a $500,000 one-time payment related to the fund balance in the special building fund. So if we took part of that increase from or the discrepancy, if we took part of the reduction from the CIP transfer, if we took half of it, we would still be able to have a 5.5% increase in our CIP for 2024. That's actually more than what we did in the 2023 budget. In your 2023 budget, we increased it 5%. So, and from staff's recommendations to prepare us for the public hearing would be to reduce the CIP reduction of 250. I've talked to Brooke and her team as they working on those CIP calculations that would come solely from the facilities side of the ledger. As you learned earlier today, we split that between roads and bridges and facilities. We have a pretty large allocation going into our CIP facilities contingency in 2024. We would take it from that. So it would not impact funding for any proposed projects in 2024. It would just reduce our capacity in terms of contingency projects, but there's still a very healthy contingency in those totals. And then take the remaining of the amount from the fund balance reduction. Just to remind commissioners, this is our process as we move forward, as we get ready for the public hearing. Revenue neutral rate letters of intent will be sent by the county clerk to taxpayers starting the 1st of August. And then we will publish our notices and prepare for a public hearing on August 30th. And stand for any questions commissioners might have.
Questions, commissioners? Okay. There's no questions. We'll open it up for public comment. Does anybody here want to provide public comment on this item? Anyone online? Okay. Go back to the commission for discussion and our motions. I just want to say how much we said this during the budget hearing, but I want to say it again, how much I appreciate our entire staff's work on our budget. It's unfortunate we miscalculated a little bit and I think, but I appreciate how thoughtful you were in thinking about which funds could be reallocated and hold that mill levy where commissioners were working. I want to make it clear that none of this changes where our allocations were to our community partners or to our county agencies. Our CIP budget is often a long-term budget. It is not exactly for next year. And as we saw today, we move things in and out of that CIP budget every year. I still have a goal of having a healthier fund balance. So that hurts a little bit on some of our fund balance goals, but we may have made that decision during our budget hearings as well. So I'm comfortable with that recommendation and appreciate the thoughtfulness that the budget staff put into that.
Glad to be able to maintain the 2 mil reduction that we were aiming for. Glad to see that happen.
Ditto. This is Commissioner Reed. I move to authorize staff to publish the 2024 budget and R&R hearing notice of intent to exceed the established R&R rate.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Thanks for your work, guys.
All right, we'll move on to appointments. I don't have any appointments on my list. Commissioner Willie, Commissioner, no. So that will move us to Administrator Miscellaneous and Commissioner Miscellaneous. Sarah, your weekly memo.
Thanks, commissioners. My weekly memo is in the packet. I wanted to let you know that we've added your election canvas dates for the rest of this year. The first of which will be the primary election canvas on Monday, August 14th at 9 a.m. Remember, if you can't attend, it's okay. We can, commissioners can appoint another canvasser if you cannot attend that time. But so just let me know and we can make sure we get that to happen. And I went ahead and included the one for the November as well. Your updated report from Little Government Relations is attached, and just want to remind everyone that we don't have a meeting next week. That's our 5th Wednesday. We've got 5 Wednesdays in August, so we're going to take the 2nd off. Right now I'm not showing any work sessions for the 9th or 16th. Please keep that somewhat tentative. I may have some things bubbling for the 16th. And commissioners, that's all I have.
Do we need to notice pie as a public meeting?
We will notice the pie judging at the county fair on Friday morning.
Thank you. One of our favorite days of the year. Any other miscellaneous items, commissioners? Okay, with that, we are adjourned.